All right, all right, all right. How's everybody doing? Good morning. Am I on at the right time? I think I'm on at the right time. Oh, goodness gracious. I got 0 people on. That's unusual. I usually got at least a couple people waiting, which makes me wonder, am I doing it wrong? Well, here we are, and we'll see what happens. Good morning. I wonder where Betsy is and Lisa. I wonder if this is online. I wonder what's going on. It's all quiet on the Western Front here. Let me check this thing and see if it's right. I wonder if I can click on the link and see myself. First of all, it's cold today, and I mean cold for my standards, Um, but I know and so I'm wearing a sweater. Like I was wearing it was like 90 2 days ago, and this morning I woke up and it was 48. That's insane. That's crazy. All right, I'm gonna click on this thing and I'm gonna see where everybody is because they're not here, and at least a couple of you should have been here by now. Let's see. Also, I'm out of Diet Coke, and that's going to make for a really interesting day for us. Let's see. Look, I'm watching myself live. That will mess you up. Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit. I'm just going to talk a little bit until someone joins us and asks questions. And the good news is I know that some folks will watch this later, and that's cool too. So you'll see me mumble and bumble for a couple minutes, and then we'll try to get to actual business. I've just been thinking a lot about the reality that just because we are, we shut everything down at this church in terms of on in-person worship and in-person gathering back in March. And most churches I know shut down back in March. And some places have come back in different ways, but by and large, we aren't back, and at least not in person, And we've done a lot of really cool things. I've been really impressed with with the work that our church has been doing in terms of making sure people feel connected when they're able, when they want to. A really powerful and robust social media presence, and having really this sounds kind of like goofy, but like having like a really good like email communications. Like that doesn't sound like super exciting, but in the reality is like the way people that's how I get my news these days. Like I don't read a physical newspaper the way I used to, so I subscribe to a couple different newspapers, but they send emails, and I will like start my morning like checking my emails and reading the news, and that's kind of a way that I start my day. And so knowing that our church is a part of that, and then we also have these fantastic connector groups where people that are localized of 3 or 4 or 5 houses in neighborhoods, and someone oversees and makes sure that people are getting just getting checked in on. And some of those have worked really well. Others ones have it's been a little bit tougher to get them going, but it's been pretty cool. And this is a group that like on Easter they dropped off flowers in people's front doors, and then recently they just dropped off all these masks. People in our church made over 1,000 masks. How cool is that? Over 1,000 masks were made at our church, and handed out to different people, and it was pretty cool to different people through the connectors. So like 1,000, like 6 or 8 people made masks, maybe a little bit more than that, and then like made up over 1,000 of them. And then we brought them together and put these little packages together, and these cool little pictures and a little note about what it means for us to be church and what we want to be moving forward, and distributed into the connector groups who then distributed them to all the homes. And it was, like things like that have just been blowing my mind. But the reason I bring it all up is, goodness gracious, it's been really tough to be. It's been really tough to try to be church this way. But that's just shorthand. All I think about is church. Like, that's my job and my vocation, and to some degree an obsession, right? But it's just been really tough for all of us as people to be people these days. The normal ways that you get to go about being a person, you're not generally able to do that right now. The normal things that most people say, like, this is what constitutes my life. You're not able to do that. And some of us, myself included, are taking the um, this pandemic seriously in terms of um, well, recognizing that it is a big deal, and um, that the coronavirus is deadly, and we don't know what could happen, and part of it, the problem is the uncertainty, right? Like, part of our concern is we don't really know. It's a brand new thing. It's not something that's been around before. Even if it's a variation on things we've seen before, we don't know what this one will do exactly. And we know that sometimes it's just brutal and awful and the worst thing ever, and other people get it and don't even know they had it. I mean, and that's weird, right? Like, what a weird dynamic. And then so you could be giving it to people and not even know it. I mean, that whole thing. So it does it does a number on your head. And then you're surrounded by, and we have other folks in our sort of in our life circles who actually don't think that it's that big a deal, or some people think that it's made up, or that it's some sort of tool for government control. So it's doubly difficult to, I think, take something seriously and try to, like, really try to follow this path. To follow this path is to shut down certain aspects of your life, and to be really, really sort of careful and intentional about every sort of interaction you have, and to not live the way you normally would, and to do that and not actually, I've seen signs out that people have put up that said we're all in this together, except that we're not. I don't mean that to be snarky. Like, we're not, because there's people who say that we're not in this at all, that it's not, we shouldn't be doing this. And so there's even this division when you make decisions about how you're going to take care of yourself and live your life, that know that there are people, maybe even within your family, or your circle of people that you trust and love, that are second guessing the decisions you're making. Which I guess is true anyway, by the way. Like, to some degree, this whole thing, like, it reminds me of life, just normal life, which is to say, you already live a life where you make decisions based on your best ideas and best data that you could possibly have, hopefully, and then hope you make right decisions, and then it may go well for you, it may not, right? And then you have people second guess you, right? Like that's a total possibility. We know that. We know that it's all kind of normal in that way. Or rather, the way people are in normal life has been heightened by this pandemic. So if you were a person who was already skeptical of authority and skeptical of governmental data, then this whole thing happening heightens your skepticism and highlights, some issues you have with that. If you're a person who is risk averse when it comes to illnesses, this has certainly heightened that, right? So there's that element of it. But anyway, the reason, so we're going through all this. And by the way, even if you're a person who doesn't buy that this is serious, or doesn't think that we should be as worried as we are, or whatever, your life is also interrupted. So actually, it's frustrating for you. I've spoken with at least one person who's not in the same place as I am about this, in terms of me and my family. I think we try to get it right, but overall, like, we're taking it seriously. Like, we think this is, and there's our lives have been radically altered, and the life of this church has been radically altered, which the life of this church I'm intimately involved in, and the life of this church is a big part of who I am and how I live. So my life and our lives have been radically altered. And I was speaking with someone who kind of, who thinks that we shouldn't be worried the way we're worried, or who thinks that we're taking measures that we shouldn't be taking, and all that. Well, and that person was frustrated too, because for them, their life has also been interrupted. I mean, the reality is this is an interruption across the board. And there's a word for this that we don't use very often in just normal everyday conversation, but it's trauma. That it's a traumatic event. But the interesting dynamic here is that normally a traumatic event would be like an instantaneous or a short-term event. A traumatic event like a car crash or a death, something that is violent and momentary, that has effects that ripple out, right? Um, that kind of thing. But right now we're in something that's like a long-term sustained trauma, and that's really different. The traumatic event is the part of the trauma is the months-long reality of it. That it's creating new patterns of the way that we interact with one another and think and experience the world around us. But it's not happening because of a there's like a lightning strike that could split a tree in half, and that would be a momentary traumatic event. But then there could just be a tree that's sitting here, and there's water. It's on the banks of a river, and this water comes up and laps against the tree over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And you don't necessarily think about it, but over years that ends up shaping the way the tree is. Or a rock, like a rock could be demolished, could be thrown on the ground and cracked, traumatic event. Or the waves could just go up against that rock for hundreds of years and eventually shape what that rock becomes. And so we're in the midst. 2020 is really a long-term sustained traumatic event. And it's a traumatic event from a pandemic standpoint and from other standpoints as well, as we know. Our political climate is so toxic. And there are a group of people, I think some people think that if our president can just be reelected, then we'll get through it, and that they will have proven that this is the right way to go, and we will just, that will, the other side of this, that'll be good. And there are other people who think we just got to get this president out of office and then we'll be okay. And the reality is we weren't okay before this. That this last 4 years has been a traumatic time for our country, whether you are a fan of the direction the country's going or not. Like whether or not you're a fan of this current administration, it's still been a traumatic time. The divisions between us have been so clearly demarcated and highlighted, and we don't know how to pretend that we belong to each other. It shouldn't be pretending, it should be real. But we don't know how to live into that. We don't even, and we don't even, and there are times when we pretend, we don't even know how to do that. And that's a really painful thing for a country's identity. Our church, Church of the Redeemer, is a church that is historically politically diverse. And by historically, I mean at least as far as I know in the last 45 years. That it's not a Republican church or a Democratic church, a liberal or a conservative church. It does things, it has done things that look pretty conservative, it has done things that look pretty liberal. And at least in the last 20 years, this church as a culture has taken a lot of pride in being a church that lives into that has that political diversity, that has the ideological diversity. There's almost no racial diversity to speak of here. We are the gender and sexuality numbers are shifting a little bit, and we're seeing a little bit more diversity in that area. Maybe not as quickly as I'd like, but we're seeing it. And the socioeconomic shift, I think, has occurred almost on generational lines. So whereas this church has a reputation of being pretty affluent, the reality is when I look at the parishioners and get to know them, that those numbers are shifting. That we really are sort of a socioeconomically diverse congregation in terms of the body of people. That's not something that's apparent when you look at the building or something like that, but you can see it when you get to know the folks. That there's a shift there. But we have historically held that political and ideological diversity by not talking about these things. So imagine what the last 4 years have been like, not like for people who are used to loving each other by not talking about it. in a time when talking about it seems to be all anyone can do. I mean, that's really been an interesting transformational event, for long-term event for this church, and we're not through it. I don't think we're at all through it. I don't think we're at all through what it will take to become like the next iteration of what our church is. But we are a church who has historically been really proud of its own political and ideological diversity, and we are now at a time, more than any time in my lifetime, when those differences are not really respected on a personal level. We'd like to think that we go to our church and these things are left at the door. And I wrote about this last week. I think that's kind of actually really weird. Because it sounds, I get it. I get the idea that on some level, the idea that you could go someplace where these things didn't divide you. Got it. And we don't know how to not make our differences in political opinion divide us. So the best we can come up with is let's not talk about it. Let's create a space where it's not discussed. Let's do that. I get that. I have a couple issues with that. I wrote about it last week, but I have a couple issues with that. I remember do you guys remember, it was those Looney Tunes with Wile E. Coyote, but not Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. I'm pretty sure it wasn't it Wile E. Coyote? I thought it was like the coyote and like a dog that was chasing him or something like that. It was like maybe it wasn't Wile E. Coyote, but there were two animals. There was like a dog and a cat, but I thought it was a dog and Wile E. Coyote. And they were like chasing each other, and one was chasing the other and trying to get him, and trying to catch him and kill him, and eat him or whatever. And then like in the cartoon, the whistle blew, and like the end of the workday, and then like the end of the workday, and so the dog stopped chasing the other guy, and they like clocked out, and they like walked out of the building, like walked away together, like, well, we'll see you tomorrow. Workday's done. See you tomorrow. And I always thought that was hilarious as a kid, right? Like but I've always had that vision in my head since then as a kid, like that these people, and I've heard stories of like, well, gosh, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill used to be friends, and these guys used to, and it was always guys, right? Because they didn't have women in these positions of power and influence, which is a whole other issue. But these guys would argue against each other all day on the floor of the Senate, and then afterwards they'd have a drink together and hang out. And the idea was that like we could check our differences and be friends, and I like that. But it's not something. But like some of these differences we have, you can't really clock out of, right? Like there are some differences. It's not just about difference in policy. It's not just about like, well, I think this is the best way to make sure that we eliminate homelessness. And the other person said, I think this is the best way for us to eliminate homelessness. I like to use that example because it's not partisan, because neither party has ever shown any serious interest in eliminating homelessness. Neither. So if you're a bleeding heart liberal and you think, well, conservatives don't help the homeless, but liberals do. Nobody helps the homeless is the reality. People who are experiencing homelessness by and large are not helped. And when you do get involved in organizations that are helping, you find people across the political spectrum in those spaces, because it really is not a partisan issue, right? But I'm digressing majorly. But no one's asking me any questions, so I'll just keep digressing. We're at a place in our country, we're at a place in our lives where some of the things that we have been able to not talk about, we can't not talk about them. I know that's a double negative, but it's what I want to say. We can't not talk about them. We're at a place now where we are seeing that things need to be discussed. I was thinking about what I said about our church being in this space of a long-term trauma by not being able to be together on this for this extended period of time. But the reality is that like this means that we're experiencing something that many other demographics of people have already experienced. Let me give you an example. Okay, pre-pandemic example. we started to put together some protocols for active shooter training at the church. And we got some security cameras. There were some people in positions of leadership at the church who had been resistant to cameras for a while. And I get it. Their main reason was really just like, you come into church and you see like a camera looking at you, like it feels weird. I get it, right? And so then we started talking about what it looked like to have appropriate security protocol at the church, and to have locks that are changed regularly, and to have cameras, which we have now, and to have an active shooter training, and to have tourniquets and things like that on hand, and like be ready for violence. And I had more than one person. It was a very common thing that people say to me, like, can you believe this is what it's come to? Or, I can't believe we live in a time where we need to do these things. And again, on one hand, you get that. You're like, yeah, what's going on? On the other hand, I'm like, oh my gosh, the black churches in America have been living with this kind of threat of violence for their entire existence. To be a black church, to be a church filled with African Americans in this country, has meant to be under threat of violence for your entire existence. We talk about, in our denomination, we have people, the trend, it's not all people, and it's not a consensus even. But I'd say there's a trend towards, especially in the clergy of the Episcopal Church, like that we wouldn't want people armed at church. We wouldn't want to have anybody. We wouldn't have armed security at the church, and we wouldn't want people coming to church packing heat. And there are other denominations where they're like literally. I grew up in a church where they're literally encouraging people to carry their guns to church to make sure that people are safe, et cetera, et cetera. Like their response to active shooter training was to get as many armed parishioners in the pews. And the Episcopal Church tends to not be like that, right? So the tendency tends to, like, there may be people who do that and don't tell me. But by and large, if that's the case, we don't really talk about it in the leadership of the church. And there are churches that just have, they ban firearms. There's a sign on their door, right? So it's a different attitude about it, right? But I remember all the while being like, oh, no guns at church, right? Going to visit someone at a local synagogue, and they had a private armed guard outside their synagogue. And the funny thing was, I was like, well, yeah, of course they do. Their synagogue, like there's a bunch of anti-Semites, a bunch across the world, and certainly in this country, many of whom have been riled up lately and encouraged in their behavior and in their hatred. And so you go to a synagogue and you see an armed guard, and your gut reaction is like, well, yeah, got it. It makes sense. It's sad, but you know why. My point in bringing that up is, when we think about that stuff for us, we're like, oh, can you believe it's come to this? And so if you want to, like, it's a word that's being used right now in a way that's very, it's a trigger word for some people. It shuts down the conversation, but I'm gonna use it anyway because we're not having a conversation, right? So I'm just talking at you. This is what privilege looks like, right? Privilege doesn't mean you don't have your own worries, fears, and concerns. Privilege means that because of certain ways of your life, aspects of your life, the color of your skin, the money in your bank account, there are certain things that you don't have to worry about that other people, by virtue of the color of their skin, by virtue of the lack of money in their bank account, they have worries and they have troubles that you don't have. And one of the things that we have not had to deal with at this church and in many Episcopal churches, because of where they're placed, is security. The threat of violence, the threat of harm. That's been a privilege. Now, I would hope that rather than saying, so, the goal would be to get all churches to be in that way, and all faith communities, that anyone in any faith community, that any mosque, any synagogue, any church, no matter what, would be safe from the threat of violence. That would be our goal, is to work towards that. So the goal isn't just to go like, oh, well, we should actually be under threat of violence like everyone else. The goal would be that we would want no one to be under that. I get that. But it shows our privilege that we haven't had to deal with that. And that when we are having to deal with the threat of violence, we go like, what, can you believe the times? Well, I can believe it. I can believe it. This isn't a digression. This is a long form like metaphor because I want to bring it back. Okay. When we talk about like this experience for the first time for many of us of long-term trauma, an event that is traumatic, like a pandemic that keeps us from being together, keeps us from taking communion with each other, taking Eucharist, participating in that ritual, participating in communal, singing, praying, hand holding, gathering, all of that. That is a real pain we suffer. That's real. That's not fake. It's real. And it's traumatic. And as I said at the very outset, it's traumatic for you whether you believe in this thing or not. It's traumatic for you whether or not you believe in trauma. That our country, the level of upheaval we're experiencing in our local communities and on a national level is traumatic, period, regardless of what you believe. Even if you're the one helping cause the problems, so to speak, it's still traumatic. That's the reality of this. But the reason I bring it up in this context is to say we're experiencing something that a lot of demographics in our society have experienced for a long time. As a person, as a white guy and a straight guy and a cisgender heterosexual white Christian male with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree and a vocation that generally has respect, even if people don't know what to do with it. They know they're supposed to respect it, even if they don't know why, or even if they don't personally. They know that I have a space in our culture where people understand my job and believe it has a place, of honor in some ways. Like there's a lot of things I don't have to experience. I haven't experienced a lot of sustained trauma, or maybe I hadn't been aware of it because I haven't had to be. So for me, this experience of this pandemic experience has been eye-opening. So this is what it feels like to not feel safe going outside. I just get a little taste of it because I'm still very safe by and large, as someone could be. So this is what it feels like to look at other people and wonder if they're going to harm me or even not on purpose, but that I'll be harmed by them. It's eye-opening, right? If you take it seriously. If you're at all introspective and think a little bit reflective about what's going on inside of you, you realize that what you're experiencing is traumatic, but you also realize that the trauma you're experiencing has a revelatory capacity, which is to say, if you allow it, you can be made aware of, through this trauma that you're experiencing, the trauma that others have experienced and are experiencing anyway. Back in California, I worked in this ministry called Laundry Love, which was pretty great. We would go and basically take over a laundromat once a month, and we would do laundry. Well, actually, we would just pay for the laundry for people who needed it. And so anybody who showed up that night, when we brought detergent and dryer sheets, and we had people help people with loads and the whole bit. And we would go and do this work, and we'd get to know people, and it was really great. We had people that were living in their cars, and they would bring whatever clothes they had, and then once a month would be all the time they could do. There were families where they might have had a home, an apartment, but they didn't have enough money to do laundry. They certainly didn't have washers and dryers, and so they would bring a whole month's worth of laundry for a family of 3 or 4 or 5, a month's worth of laundry, and try to get us to do all of it. We would if we could. Those kinds of things happen, right? And sometimes we develop relationships where we could try to help those folks and see what we could do. That's real. But I remember one time, I was talking to a guy who we were doing his laundry, and he wasn't having any of the friendship stuff. I mean, he was fine, but he wasn't rude. Although he could have been. It's his business if he wants to be rude. We were going to do his laundry, and he could be however he wanted to be. But I remember it was a man who's experiencing homelessness, and I said I had to go home, get my kid to bed, because it was late in the evening. I had a baby. I was like, I gotta go home, And he said something to me like, that's the thing. You get to go home, but I live here. Which on its face seems obvious, right? On top of that, it might seem rude. Some people are like, oh, you were doing that guy a favor and that's how he talked to you? He did. And the thing that I think about is, he was right. That I was visiting him in his homelessness. He doesn't get the opportunity to step out of that. He doesn't get to clock out of being homeless. People of color in our country don't get to clock out of being people of color. And there might be spaces that they have found to be safe within that. But the ongoing conditioning is one of your guard. There's just no way around that. There's no way around the fact that that's the kind of culture in which we live. I was talking to a friend recently about this, and she was arguing with she was saying that she didn't really believe in systemic racism, and I said, well, we need to talk about that then, and we did. And we had a pretty good conversation, and I said, well, all the stuff that she got it. Like, who do you think knows more about racism in America, white people or black people? And she's like, oh, black people. Oh, okay, good. So we're on the same page there. Do you think it's easier to be a white person than it is to be a black person in America? Yeah. Oh, you do? Okay, great. Why is that? And we started talking about that, and I said, okay, so what you're describing is systemic racism. You do believe it. You don't like the name of it because the wrong person said it to you, right? The person that you wouldn't vote for used the term. So you don't believe in it. But you just described believing in it. And then the question that she asked me that was really, really helpful, genuinely, and it was in a relationship, it was a friendship, it was a conversation so I'm not saying names, right, in confidence, but also it was a conversation between two people who care about one another. And she said, are you ashamed of being white, or should we be ashamed? Do you think we should be ashamed of being white, or something like that? I said, no. The privilege that I'm describing is not something over which I have shame. And by the way, the people I've spoken with that have helped me recognize my privilege have never asked me to be ashamed. I said, it's not about being ashamed. Shame is actually I'm way in, like most Episcopal priests my age, I'm way in the Brene Brown camp about shame and vulnerability. And if you know what that is, you know. And if you don't, you got to look it up, right? But I'm in that camp. Shame is not shame is unhelpful. Shame is corrosive. Shame is disconnective. Shame will not bring you into fuller relationship. Shame will not help you through the things that we need to change. Shame is not good for you in that way. Okay? And also, it's not about feeling bad. It's about recognizing that my life is easier because of this, because of the color of my skin, because of the level of education I've had. And other people's lives are harder because they haven't been born with what I've been born with. And that's not fair. And we would like America to be fair, or as close to fair as possible. So the question is, what will we do to help make it more fair? What will we do to help make things right? That's not about shame. That's not about feeling bad. That's actually about the opposite. It's about being empowered to empower others. It's about being empowered to recognize your own stuff and loving yourself enough to recognize when you're a mess and have done things, or when by totally inadvertently you've not helped others, or to recognize that just by virtue of the fact that you were born on third base, you didn't hit a triple, right? You were born on third base. Just recognizing that, like that's actually really healthy. And then saying, well, we need to change that, right? Recognizing that and saying we need to change that. But it's taking these traumatic events to help a lot of us wake up to this stuff. And I'm sorry for that, but that's the reality. The traumatic events we've seen played out in terms of the racial injustices in our country, the things that have played out in the last 6 months have been so painful and also so revelatory to people. Now, Maybe not. Maybe we should have. Many of us should have just seen it beforehand, or have heard it beforehand, and that's on us. But nevertheless, the movement is afoot, and there's this energy, this movement towards we've got to change the way that we are. This is leaving no stone unturned. The church, it's affecting the church. The church is going to be different at the end of all this. At the end of this social upheaval, there will not be a return to normal. There will be a return to normal in the sense of like many of us will show back up on a Sunday and sit in pews and listen to specific kind of music and say a certain kind of liturgy and share and say hello and shake hands and hug again and that's normal. So yes, that will be back. We're not going to individual pods for the rest of our lives, right? I don't think that's a reality. But we're going to come through this having been shaped a little bit and changed. We're going to come through this event living a little differently, you know, and understanding that we took for granted. And that's shifting. All of this is a long-term traumatic event. Which means that it's taking a chunk out of you. Me. And, you know, I feel like I'm going to do everything I can to do my part. And also like I'm really tired all the time. I worry about talking about that because I actually don't want anyone to worry about me. Like that's my personality. I don't want you to worry, and I don't want you to worry. Like I'm not worried about me. It's not about being worried about like, oh gosh, is he all right? Like it's just a matter of like, no, none of us are all right, really. Not the way we want to be. But I'm also sort of soaking up the reality that knowing that is not the worst thing in the world. Knowing that we're not all okay is actually not the worst thing in the world. Taking a step back and breathing and living it a little bit differently is not the worst thing in the world. I see that I've got some people on, but no one's chatting and no one's asking questions. I'm not offended by that, by the way. I just don't know how long I can keep up a monologue. So if you have questions for me, I would be delighted to respond to them. I found out yesterday that I think maybe I know one for sure and maybe two different clergy. I know neither of them, but I know of two different clergy people who in the last week have ended their own lives. In my denomination specifically, Episcopal priests. And I've been really reticent to talk about it. I've seen a lot of things about like, look out for your clergy people. And I've been really reticent to talk about that or post about that because I genuinely feel good and don't want people to worry about me in that way, like me personally as Phil. And also I think it's my personality to minimize anytime I am upset or worried. I mean, my personality is to bottle it up and be like, I'm fine, guys, don't worry about it. I mean, I let it out other places. Don't worry, I'm not in denial. But I share it with like one or two people. But I'm not gonna like get up in front of my congregation and get up in front of y'all and be like this is how it is right now. You know, I try to be composed. It's my job to pastor to people, and part of pastoring to people is to not give them all of your mess, but to be able to take their mess. That's just part of the job. There's no way around that, right? So I'm not in that space, and full disclosure, I never have been in that space where I have despaired for my own life. That's not been my or wondering about ending it all. And that's never been me. But I know people for whom it has been, both lay and ordained. And they don't. And I mean, I was talking to a friend who works in a synagogue, and look, we don't all know what we're doing, and we don't know what success looks like. Right? Like, we don't know what it looks like to do a good job. All of the measures that I have for doing a good job, quote unquote, for what I do, are moot right now. They're. I mean, like in our denomination, one of the big things that we've talked about, and we've been talking about changing it for years and years and years, but the reality is we in our denomination, we very often judge success based on the average attendance at a Sunday service, average Sunday attendance. That doesn't exist. There is no attendance. And when attendance starts up again, it will be in a very limited and controlled fashion. Okay. How will we know? Another way to tell is by our fundraising. Not very sexy and spiritual, right? Really, though. How will fundraising go during this time? We don't know. We're about to find out, getting started on that in the next week. But we don't know, do we? We don't know what's going to happen. And even if fundraising goes poorly, it won't necessarily be an indication of that we've done bad work. It could just be a function of people's all sorts of things, right? And even if or we could do poorly, but people all like us already and they feel bad for us and they want to give us money, or we don't know. That, like, the result isn't actually necessarily connected to the work, not directly. So it's really weird, like, knowing, not like it's so strange to have a job where you really don't know if you're doing a good job and what that means, right? It's weird. And so we've got colleagues that have been under extreme. I mean, we've all been under extreme stress, and we've had colleagues that have handled it differently, and some have not been handled it well, or have handled it the best they can. It's no critique on people who have not been able to weather this storm at all. And I'm not bragging at all that like that I haven't gone down that road too far. It's not a brag. I don't know why. I don't know why some people this is really impossible for, and others it isn't. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think it's about strength at all. The church has been changing. The Episcopal Church, the church in America, Christian church, has been changing dramatically in the last 20 years. And 2020 isn't actually brand new. It's just a heightened version of what's already been happening. It's pushing things to happen more quickly that were already going to happen. This is true also in 2020 is not the first year where we've noticed climate change at all. But so much of us is literally burning right now. We have to pay attention to it differently. And I saw something that's like, don't blame 2020 for the fires that were clearly caused by our long-term mismanagement of land and resources. Don't blame a year for a thing that we've been building towards for a long time. It's not luck, right? And the church is similar like that, But here's what I keep coming back to. This has been pretty dark, right? Here's what I keep coming back to. I have seen so much love. I mean, I have seen so much love in all of this. The tenderness of people's willingness to just share their hearts, people's willingness to say I love you to me and to each other, people's acknowledgement of how much they miss each other and how much they want to be together, people's desire to stay connected, people's desire to be community, people's desire to make a difference has been heightened. Their awareness for how important connection, belonging, and belovedness is, their awareness has risen. People have become more clear that they need to play a part in the changing of this culture so that we can be a more just culture, so that we can be a more loving and peaceful people. People are becoming more aware that they have a part to play in that. And we're seeing people go in on it that haven't before. I've seen it here at the church. I've seen people's lives changed. And I've seen people be motivated to act differently than they've ever acted. And I just got a message from Leslie saying that are you seeing the chat on YouTube? I'm worried it's not updating on your end or my chats aren't going through. I'm not seeing any of the chats. I'm seeing nothing. I got no chats on my end. And I don't know how to fix that. Oh my gosh. You guys, I'm seeing all these chats now. You've been here the whole time? It was Ralph Wolf and Sam Sheepdog. Holy smokes. You guys, there you are. Oh my gosh. This is so much better. Leslie, thank you for messaging me on Facebook. And I'm glad I looked over and saw it. Oh gosh, I was so tired of talking to myself. You guys are here. Oh, I feel so much better now. Now I'm going to read through what you said and I'm going to stop talking. Oh, Leslie Martin, you hero. You absolute hero. Now, someone write another thing and let me know if I can see it now. Now that I can see Liz and Betsy and Leslie here. Someone type something and I'll let you know if I can see it. Oh, hi, Phil. Yes, 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 yes. I don't know how that happened. Oh, this is so much better. Leslie Martin says, I think it's good that we finally see that everyone is not okay. It's creating a dialogue that previously seemed taboo and will hopefully help to destigmatize talking about mental health. Betsy says, you can worry about me no matter what I say. Betsy, thank you. You love me a lot, and I'm so great. You know I love you. I mean, you know that. But I'm glad that you love me, and I take that as a symbol of that, and I'm honored that you'll worry about me about anything. I guess when I say it, I mean I don't want people to go like, oh God, you know, like, oh gosh, is he okay? You know what I mean? Like that thing, because I've just got so much beauty happening, and I see it. I'm so in love with life, and I'm so in love with like my work, and I'm so in love with church, and I just am madly, and I'm in love with my family, my wife and my children, and this little dog who's a total pain in my ass. But last night I took him for a walk and I smoked a cigar while walking, and then I ran into people, some folks from down at the cathedral that live down the street from me, and I thought, well, why aren't they going to Redeemer if they live down the street? Gosh darn it! But whatever, to each their own. And then I ran into another person with a new dog, and I mean, I'm loving life, but it's also just really, really hard. So I want you to, I appreciate your worry, and I hope you know what I mean when I say I don't want you to worry. I just mean I don't want people to be like, should we call someone? Like, or is he telling us everything? Like, I'm okay. I just also am really sad a lot, and tired and suffering a lot. Both are true at the same time, and it's really weird for me. Leslie says, mental health is a tricky subject that is often looked down upon when it comes up. It was in the context of mental health that I was told God made a mistake when he made me. You shared that last week. And the fact that more quote unquote normal people are experiencing this kind of stress and breakdown will hopefully help them to see and talk and be more receptive to our everyday struggles. Leslie, you, during your time, so Leslie grew up at Redeemer, and then she went off and experienced the world. And then she came back to Cincinnati for I think you were here for about a year and a half, maybe 2, and really got back involved in the church. And then she headed off to headed west to do some pretty cool things with your career, right? But while you were here, you were so involved, and I remember you in several adult forum conversations being really attentive, intentionally so, to making sure the group was aware that mental illness was something that that should be part of our conversation and shouldn't be stigmatized. That we should have language for it. And yeah, and you're crushing it in Vancouver, which is awesome, by the way. You know, your mom is like ridiculously proud of you, and she shares with us all the time, which is so cool. And I just think that's really key. I think it's really important that we that if we recognize mental health in a lot of different ways, that there's that and it's one of the reasons why whenever there are shootings, mass shootings or violent outbursts from almost entirely young white men, that people go, oh, this is a mental health issue. That further stigmatizes it. It creates a dynamic where the statement is that people who suffer from mental illness must be violent. That doesn't work a bunch. I did make you cry. If I could get Leslie to cry, you know, if I had my sermon bingo chart, right? You know, if I could make this person huff, if I could make Leslie cry, if I could get like 10 people to laugh, you know, it's like my bingo card, you know, like I got, okay, we're getting them, got it. So I think that's true. And you should know that being a person who does what I do, when we find out that there are people that, for whom, for whatever reason, our words resonate, it's awesome. It's like the best gift. Like the idea that I could make you feel seen, as you said, like, dude, that's the thing. Like, oh, I did that for you? Yes. You know what I mean? That's pretty cool. So, all right, now that I know that you all are here, now I want to know what I might have should have said, or what kind of questions you might have had during. Liz, I don't know if you or Lisa have anything. Betsy, any questions? I'm super tired of just monologuing, genuinely. Leslie says, you made me cry a bunch of times, especially when mom and dad were out of town. People always wanted to comfort me, and I still feel so loved. That thing you mentioned is that we needed to destigmatize too, is what we need to do. Almost everyone feels that way, and people who feel worse are afraid to ask for help because they don't want to be seen that way. It's true. I don't want to be seen as weak. And I call it weak, right? Like, that's my stuff. Like, that's my problem. If I'm suffering from something, I don't want it to be registered as weakness, which is for men in our culture, weakness is a death knell, right? That's awful. And it is tricky. I think I do have a responsibility. I agree with you. That is a stigma we need to dismantle. And at the same time acknowledge that there is a responsibility that those of us in professions like mine, it's not that there is an expectation that we all be mentally healthy all the time. Well, actually, I think there is that expectation, and it's killing us. But what I would say is there is a healthy expectation that the people who are in charge of things like a church, in charge of your spiritual sort of community, not that we always be perfect, actually, but that we be aware of our mental health, and that we be doing the things necessary to take care of ourselves. That we model prioritizing self-care, which can sound so much. There are people, and I have been a person who's fought against that, because it has sounded to me sometimes like people just like, some of the people that I've heard it from, I'm like, I think you're using that as an excuse because you're not engaged. That's been my attitude sometimes, which is that's not my proudest moment. I'm not bragging about that. That's not healthy. But I mean, there is an expectation that I think is healthy for us to have of our leaders, that they be self-aware, that they be working to take care of themselves, right? But what you just said, you can't be alone and still be part of a successful community. This is one of the most difficult things for me, is my position the job of a clergy person is inherently lonely in some ways. There are things that we see and experience that we don't share because we can't. Because we hold people's confidence. Because we want to be a place where people can feel safe to go. And we want the church to be a place where they know that each individual, it is a community, and it's a community of individuals, and we want each individual to feel safe. And so we have a responsibility in that way. So there's a loneliness in that. There really is. But we have to figure, and I've seen it crush some priests and bishops. I've also seen it abused and misused. It turns into sort of like, it can turn into addictions, we know, too quickly and too often. It can turn into an attitude of sort of, woe is me, I'm alone. And not knowing how to reach out because the desire is to always seem strong, right? And we don't want to be this, like we shouldn't be, a good clergy person doesn't want to be the center of everybody's attention, actually. We want to facilitate you all in the work you do and not just have y'all look at us, which is funny, said by a guy who's been talking at a camera all by himself for the last hour, but you get the idea. But you can't be alone. I came back to church, Leslie, when I was 22. Yeah, just before I turned 23. And it was specifically because I realized that I was Christian, whether I wanted to be one or not. And I realized that I couldn't do that all by myself. That I couldn't be Christian all by myself. That I needed to be Christian with others, which is really just to say I needed to share my life with others. Because my Christianity is a part of my life, right? Lonely and alone are not the same, though. You can be lonely and still be an active part of a community, and you are definitely not alone. That is very helpful. I am a person who experiences loneliness a lot, and I'm not alone hardly ever. But I don't say that sarcastically or woe is me, like it's just a reality. Like loneliness and melancholy are sort of a part of my character. They're just a part of my personality. So I sort of just recognize them now and see them. Sometimes they bother me, but other times I just recognize them as sort of like part of the road trip, right? The great road trip of life, looking around and be like, there's my loneliness, there's my melancholy. Okay. So, but also, as you said, being seen is really important. Feeling seen is really important. Having others know that you're being heard and being accepted for who you are, not for who you think you're supposed to be or who others think you should be, is really important. And I want to make sure that we're continuing to create a church where that's the case. More than anything, what I want is to create a church where that's the case. And so that brings me back to, Liz got it right. I lost the thread, but Sam the wolf, and it was the wolf and the sheepdog, right? Ralph Wolf and Sam Sheepdog. Oh man, I loved Ralph and Sam. Like, you can't clock out of struggling with mental illness. You can't clock out of the color of your skin. You can't clock out of your gender. You can't clock out of your sexuality or your sex. You can't clock out of your income bracket. You can't clock out of what you actually believe. And so if we're going to create a church where everyone is welcomed, I don't think the way that we do it is by saying you're in so long as you clock out of these things of yourself. I don't think that's a healthy ask. I don't think that's a healthy ask. I think that if we're serious about being welcomed, about making the church as much as possible to resemble the kingdom of God, then we need to embrace the whole of people, the all of people. You know? Yeah, it may feel that way sometimes, but you're a valuable part of the community. I have memories I tuck away and bring up when that loneliness comes up. I use them to fight my mind when it's being mean. My wife, um, who's just a wonderful person, she's just a really wonderful human. For my birthday, she made me this video. She solicited people to send in short videos of themselves saying to me what they thought of me and what I meant to them and some happy memory or something like that. And it was like 45 minutes long of people telling me this things. And it was like the best 45 minutes of this whole pandemic. I need that. I need to go watch that again, But I have it now, tucked away, as you said, for when my mind is being mean. To know that we are loved is so powerful beyond measure. So wonderful. I went for the first 37, 40 minutes with not knowing the chat was there. It wasn't working for me. And I meant everything I said, but also it was so strange to say it by myself. And the moment I knew you all were here and interacting, it completely changed me and made me, I was like going to leave this thing so drained. And now I'm leaving so full, just to know that I was actually, even if I didn't know it, spending time with you guys, you friends. And like, that's what I'm talking about. And that's kind of what you mean, Leslie. Like, even when you're lonely, you're not alone. That's exactly what just happened to me. Symbolism. Think about it. Betsy, thanks for being here. I was legit worried when I looked and there was no chat, and I was like, Betsy? At least Betsy. Where's Betsy? So I'm really, really glad to know that you've been here, and that helps. But anyways, y'all, listen. Next week, same bat time, same bat channel. If I don't see someone commenting right away, I had to pop out the live chat. That happened to me one other time when we've done this. So I'll just be aware of that. But also, like, shoot me some questions beforehand just in case. And also, like, invite others to join. I really do want to, like, build this up, not for, like, oh, it's a big deal purposes, but just like the more we have, the more fun it can be. And when we get other people involved, they're going to ask other questions and have other opinions, which are going to make this thing get even funkier and weirder. And I'm all about getting funkier and weirder. That sounds fun. Let's do that. Wanted to let you know that I have been listening to a guy named Moses Sumney. He's pretty great. You should check him out. Some of you will not dig that at all, but some of you might. And then I've been listening to, I wanted to tell you, what did I just hear that was just like blowing my mind? I mean, a lot of Gillian Welch, a lot, and I threw on some more Bob Dylan, of course. There's this song that I just heard recently. Y'all need to check out this British folk singer who is in her 70s. And her name is, where is she? I got to tell you about this. You got to check her out. Shirley Collins. Shirley Collins was famous back in the 60s, and she just put out an album. Called, what is her album called? Nope. Heart's Ease. Heart's Ease. Check her out. She'll blow your mind. Like, 80-something-year-old British lady sings a whole album of folk songs. Killer. She does a version of What Wondrous Love Is This. So good. So check that out. Check her out. And if you got any music recommendations, send them my way. Keep listening to music. That's what keeps me going. All right. Much love, all my love to you all, and we will get back together next week, and hopefully we'll get it right from the outset. All right, team. Thank you so much. Okay. Bye.